When looking at Disney's Hollywood Studios as it stands today, it's hard to imagine it began not as a theme park, but a working movie and TV studio, and the rise and fall of the Backstage Studio Tour tells the story of not just the loss of one of the park's most beloved experiences, but the demise of one of Disney's most ambitious endeavors. The story begins at a very dark point in Disney's history. Once known for classic animated movies, wonderful live-action films, and incredible theme park experiences, the parks and company as a whole began to really struggle in the 1980s. Their animations were duds at the box office, live-action films had lost the Disney magic, and with the exception of the recently opened Epcot, the parks were seen as becoming stagnant. Now, I plan on diving deeper into this aspect of Disney's history in a future video called How Michael Eisner Saved and Almost Completely Destroyed the Magic Kingdom, or something like that. But long story short, for a time, Disney was desperately in need for a new direction. So the vice chairman of Warner Brothers, Frank Wells, was hired as Disney's new president, and with him came the president of Paramount Pictures, Michael Eisner.
I said, "Would you like to know why I should be the chairman of the Walt Disney Company?" He said, "Yeah, I'd love to know." So I then made about a 10-minute speech. I could not tell you what I said, but I said something like the company should be run from a creative point of view rather than a financial point of view.
At the time of Eisner's arrival, a new movie-themed pavilion was already in the works at Epcot, set to reside between the Land and the Imagination Pavilion. Upon learning about these plans, Eisner insisted the idea was strong enough for more than just a section of Epcot. And in May of 1985, the company officially announced the Disney MGM Studios as their third gate theme park in Florida. But there's a little more to the story. The previous year, Universal Studios gave a presentation over at Paramount as potential investors for their brand new standalone theme park, Universal Studios Florida. While their new park would revolve more around standalone attractions than their Hollywood location, it would also function as a working movie and TV studio with the goal of creating a Hollywood of the East. But it just so happens that in this initial pitch meeting was none other than Paramount president, Michael Eisner. With Disney's announcement of MGM Studios just a year later, Universal wasn't too happy to say the least, though Eisner would always deny any wrongdoing or idea stealing.
I don't think anybody else has the resources to attack quality the way we do. Most people take shortcuts for either economic reasons or because they're lazy.
Much like Universal, Disney's new park would also function as a working movie studio with the goal of also creating a Hollywood of the East. And alongside offering visitors a behind-the-scenes look at TV and film production, part of this included a totally not copying Universal Backlot Studio tram tour, with an also totally not copying Universal's Earthquake tram tour attraction of their own. But one aspect of the tour was unique, as instead of Universal's 40 to 60-minute journey, Disney's would be over 2 hours long.
You know, most people take shortcuts because they just don't know how to do it right.
Construction on Disney's new Florida theme park began in 1986, and while the actual park would open in 1989, the backlot portion was finished a year early to begin production on various movies and TV shows, such as The Lottery starring Bette Midler. Other early productions included Splash 2, Ernest Saves Christmas, the new Mickey Mouse Club, and of course the television special of the park's grand opening.
But still, I had questions. Who built this place, and why? Maybe she had the answers. Lucky for me, she was all ears.
Now, to give you an idea of just how much of the new park relied on the whole working TV and film production aspect, aside from a handful of shows, restaurants, and interactive experiences, MGM Studios debuted with only 2 attractions that could even be considered rides: the Great Movie Ride and the Backstage Studio Tram Tour. So let's go back to the year 1989, and after having ridden the Great Movie Ride and seen the infamous show scene that functioned for just under a year, we now enter the production center.
We really have a full working production facility.
Okay, Katzenberg, we get it.
That rivals anything in Hollywood.
Alright, message loud and clear.
We claim that equals the best studio in the world.
Believe it or not, I'm not taking these out of context. Anyway, upon entering the production center, we have a few options. We could enter the magic of Disney Animation, which offered a tour through the animation department where you could see artists working on new Disney films. We could also grab some food at the Soundstage restaurant, especially if you were a fan of the movie Big Business starring Bette Midler, as it was decorated using some of the actual sets. There you could also grab a quick afternoon drink at the Catwalk Bar. But instead, we're gonna go on the park's main attraction that essentially gave us a glimpse upon which the foundation of MGM Studios was built, the Backstage Studio Tour.
A tram tour zigzags through the Backlot area, where all the ingredients of movie making are on display. The first movie to make full use of all the studio facilities was The Lottery, starring Bette Midler.
Traveling through the queue, we finally board the glorious Universal Studio Disney's Backstage Shuttle. After passing by a few of the backstage buildings, the tram tour, more or less, officially began. First up was the costume department and would continue through 2 other stages. These contained the makeup department, lighting department, and camera storage. The last stage held the scenic shops where, as the brochure describes, if it's in the script, here's where the studio craftsmen build it. From there we enter Residential Street, featuring a number of facade homes used in some of your favorite productions.
Now, this could be an ordinary house on an ordinary street anywhere in the USA, but it turns into something special when the stars come out. Stars like Estelle Getty and Rue McClanahan from the Golden Girls.
Wait. Isn't that the same guy that starred in the Universal Studios Florida promos? You know, their movie production-based rival theme park? Pick a side, dude. Seriously.
You know, there's something so familiar about your voice.
There was also an appearance by the one and only Herbie the Love Bug, who would race towards the trams. The next part of the tour was always my favorite, as it took you through the Boneyard featuring old movie prop vehicles. Now understandably, the tour might not seem all that thrilling at the moment, but from here we're off to the totally not copying Universal Catastrophe Canyon.
It's an amalgam of classic movie disaster scenes. A raging Titanic killer earthquake inferno force of no return. Shortened for convenience sake to Catastrophe Canyon.
We then drive through New York Street, featuring the sets used in your favorite shows like The Lottery starring Bette Midler. Now it's important to note for later that as you looped around New York Street, you would drive by the dip machine from Who Framed Roger Rabbit, as this, oddly enough, serves as an anchor of sorts for the Backlot's changes. But believe it or not, it's already been about an hour into the tour, and after passing by Washington Square for the second time, we now arrive at the rest area and exit the tram. Here you could grab a snack at the Studio Catering Company, or relax in the New York Gardens featuring the iconic fountain from Splash. You could also stop by Toon Park and explore the incredible Loony Bin, and for once, I'm not being sarcastic.
This place is called the Loony Bin.
This place is so cool. Look, Joy, this is the Toon Patrol wagon from Who Framed Roger Rabbit.
Now, full disclosure, Who Framed Roger Rabbit is one of my favorite movies of all time, so I may be a bit biased. But here, though you could buy toys and souvenirs, the warehouse was filled with tons of props and decorations from the animated live-action hybrid. Anyway, now it's time for the second half and walking portion of the Backlot tour. But maybe the hour-plus long tram tour has you wanting to go back into the actual park, or maybe it's just time for you to head home. Well, too bad, as there was literally no way back into the park except through the second half of this over 2-hour-long tour.
I thought I was on my way home.
The walking portion began with a pre-show starring Get Out of Here, Bette Midler, for once it's not about you. The walking portion began with a pre-show starring Goldie Hawn and Rick Moranis from the recent box office hit Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, in which he's accidentally shrunk and makes a joke you would never see in a Disney park today. The tour began at a water tank, and the first demonstration included a storm simulation and ocean battle. Again, totally not copying Universal Studios, though I'll admit their version was much more impressive. Next up is a tour through the 2 special effects stages. First was the visual effects stage, which featured all kinds of movie props, and you could even spot the iconic robot Johnny Five from Short Circuit. Here you witness demonstrations of how visual effects such as stop motion and puppetry are used in your favorite movies, and get to see the iconic shrink ray from the recent box office hit, Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. From Stage 1, you entered Stage 2, which featured a chroma key demonstration revolving around the recent box office hit. Yeah, Honey, I Shrunk the Kids was a pretty big deal back then. Then it was off to what was supposed to be the highlight of the walking tour, which included 3 working sound stages. Here, you could look down through a series of viewing windows onto whatever production was filming at the time. But while promotional material would have you thinking this was a constantly active aspect of the tour, in reality, most of the time it was just an empty set. But hey, you got to see highlights of The Lottery starring Bette Midler.
For instance, Bette's apartment was built in a soundstage here at our studios. All those street scenes weren't really filmed in New York City. They were done on our own backlot version of New York Street.
After crossing a bridge, you then went to Stage 4, which featured examples of location shooting featuring sets from... yeah, I'm not going to say it this time. Then it was on to the post-production facilities, but since these were rarely used, most of the time you were just directed to a screen.
R2, whiz, zoom in. R2, out of control. No, it's 2 shots. No. You've made us all quite dizzy. Well, those are just some of the camera angles the editor might choose when putting a scene together.
All jokes aside, apart from George Lucas's acting...
Here it is, from just one angle. Here, let's try it again. That's the magic of editing.
It was a pretty cool video about the power of editing. The next portion featured Mel Gibson and Pee Wee Herman talking about sound editing. Okay, I'm just gonna say, I would love to see all of these different shows officially released someday because they truly are the epitome of the late 80s and early 90s. The tour concluded at the Walt Disney Theater, which featured a short film starring Michael Eisner from the 50th anniversary TV special.
Excuse me, we're about to start the screening if you'd like to join us.
When the park opened, the original version of the Backlot tour was met with mixed reviews, but as initially planned, this version of the studio tour was only the beginning, as the park's Phase 2 construction would have included the first of many totally not copying Universal tram tour experiences. The one that came closest to a reality was based around a supposed remake of Journey to the Center of the Earth. You'd enter a show building and travel through an ice cavern, and as the room became freezing, your guide comments that he thought this was supposed to be a hot set. With that, the temperature rose as you entered a lava-filled cavern and passed by remains of the lost city of Atlantis. Suddenly, without warning, a giant creature rose from the lava and lunged at your vehicle, but thankfully the tram and its riders escape unharmed. This was meant to rival, if not surpass, Universal's kind of similar King Kong attraction. However, plans for this admittedly pretty cool experience were shelved when Disney surveyed guests and, surprise surprise, found the #1 complaint was how little there was to do in the park. So the budget for the tram tour experience was redirected into the already planned Roger Rabbit's Hollywood and would have been one of the main draws of the Sunset Boulevard expansion. But when the Roger Rabbit aspect was scrapped due to licensing issues, the budget most likely went into the Rock and Roller Coaster, as it would go into Roger Rabbit's originally planned location. However, this would still be a few years away. But visitors had another major complaint that needed to be addressed: the crowds and limited walking space. So within just months of the park's opening, half of the New York section became a walking area and was now mentioned on the tour as a way to get even closer to the buildings on New York Street. This would be the first of many times the tram tour's route was shortened, and since the section contained the dip machine, it now had to be fenced off to keep visitors from getting too close. But this wouldn't last long either, as with plans to build a sci-fi dining restaurant in the now open section of New York Street, the facade was moved to near the walking portion of the tour, and the structure would now serve as a stage for the Mutant Ninja Turtle show. The Dipmobile was moved to the unloading station for the tram tour, and while this may seem like a pretty insignificant detail, it's important for later. To compensate for the removal of one of the tram tour's highlights, similar to the Great Movie Ride, the tram and its occupants would become involved in a show revolving around gangsters.
You've got to get mad! You've got to say, I'm a human being! My life has value!
Another major complaint was the 2+ hour long tour, with no way back into the park before the hour-long second half of the tour, so by 1991, the entire concept was reworked. A portion of Backstage property named Mickey Avenue had only intended to function as a way for audience members to access the various live studio tapings, so this area was redesigned to be accessible to the general public, and was modeled after the Disney Animation Studio in Burbank, California. Along with the new walkway, the tour was split into 2 sections, a shortened 25-minute long tram tour and a separate 35-minute long walking tour, allowing visitors to do one or both in any order. Visitors entered the tram tour portion the same way as before, but the facade once home to the Dip Machine and Ninja Turtle show would now be the new entrance and queue for the walking tour. This was given a separate name of Inside the Magic. Poetically, the Ninja Turtle show was moved right back next door to the iconic vehicle from Roger Rabbit, near the exit of the tram tour. But that's not all, as in response to complaints that there was still not enough walking space, the tram tour's route was again shortened, this time making virtually all of New York Street as part of the actual theme park. And because of these changes to the tour, a rest stop was no longer needed, so the gardens became the iconic Honey, I Shrunk the Kids playground. Finally, the original theater that served as the tour's finale became home to a new show called Here Come the Muppets, so a second, smaller theater was constructed for the tour's finale. Now, it might be hard to believe, but all of these changes to the Backstage studio tour have just taken place within 2 years of the park's opening, but even more changes were on the way.
Welcome to Muppet Vision 3D!
By 1992, the Backlot portion of MGM Studios became home to the partially realized Muppet Complex, as well as the first incarnation of the studio showcase featuring various movie props from the film Rocketeer. Other displays came and went, but one of the most memorable was the Nightmare Before Christmas showcase. I should also mention that during the construction of the new theater that would house Beauty and the Beast, a more or less temporary theater was built on the Backlot, featuring a number of different shows over the years. In the mid-1990s, the studio showcase moved to its new location near the exit of the tram tour. But at the risk of meandering a bit too much away from the primary subject of this episode, we're gonna jump to the year 1996.
The stars come out for all the excitement at Disney's newest theme park, the most popular movie and television studios in the world.
Despite having the goal of becoming a Hollywood of the East, both MGM Studios and their rival Universal Studios Florida were horribly failing within this aspect of the parks. In the beginning, both of the studios actually did okay. However, as the novelty wore off, outside of a small list of game shows or in-house productions, filming at either parks for outside studios was seen as impractical, costly, and just plain inconvenient. So it was around the same time that MGM Studios began shifting its narrative from a quote-unquote Hollywood of the East to a place where visitors could simply experience the magic of movie making. But while Universal Orlando's tram tour, created solely to try and compete with Disney, was removed just 5 years after opening, MGM Studios' version would press on. Though to be fair, Universal's was pretty boring, but the history is fascinating, so if you want to check out a previous episode exploring this in detail, click on the link above. It was also by this point that Disney began quietly dropping the abbreviation MGM from certain aspects of the park. This was due to a legal battle with the real MGM over the use of its name, as they had believed it would only be used for licensing of characters and films for attractions like the Great Movie Ride, not for an actual working motion picture studio.
Now here at the theme park's own animation studio, you can relive the history of cartooning, and you can look over the shoulders of Disney's master artists.
To the surprise of no one, Disney's animation studio tour was one of the highlights of the whole production aspect of the park. Here you could actually, for once, see the production of future Disney films, and was really the only truly successful part of their dreams as a working movie studio. So in 1996, the decision was made to expand the animation department that would, for better or worse, replace the tram tour's entrance and loading area. So the tram tour's new entrance would take the place of the Inside the Magic walking tour portion, which was renamed the Studio Backlot Tour, and the water tank demonstration would instead become a pre-show for the tram tour. This now led to a bridge with the attraction's new queue and loading area that was filled to the brim with all kinds of movie props, including the train from The Lottery starring Bette Midler. Once again, the tram tour's route was altered, with the first portion now offering the exciting view of a parking lot, though often movie vehicles were put on display to liven things up. But don't expect to find the Dipmobile on the tour anymore, as its facade in the area behind that once was part of the Loony bin, which by this point had removed virtually all traces of the Roger Rabbit props, was now the Goosebumps Funhouse. But you could find the classic movie vehicle alongside the trolley in the Boneyard that would literally rot away over the years. The walking tour portion was also shortened with the new name of Backstage Pass, but it no longer featured the post-production facilities from the original version. While the first two stages still offered a glimpse into the magic of visual effects, they now revolved around whatever Disney film was about to be released, in this case 101 Dalmatians. However, the sound stages were no longer used for active productions, and instead showcased sets used in upcoming movies like 101 Dalmatians. After the show Home Improvement wrapped in 1999, the sets were put on display and was included as part of the experience.
Does everybody know what time it is?
By the late 90s to early 2000s, it was clear Disney had long abandoned its hopes of a Hollywood of the East, but they were still trying to hold on to the theme of the magic of movie making. But the harsh reality was that with the rise of DVD bonus features, the average Joe could now binge through hours upon hours of behind-the-scenes content from the comfort of their very own home. And unlike Universal Studios Hollywood, without the allure of visiting a real movie studio and seeing real sets and actual productions, this aspect of the park was seen by many as outdated. So ultimately, Disney realized the times had changed, and after holding on for so many years, they decided to finally let go. By 2003, Soundstage 3 became a Who Wants to Be a Millionaire show, and part of Stage 4 became the One Man's Dream walkthrough and would utilize the second theater from the walking tour. The rest of Stage 4 became a display featuring sets from the Haunted Mansion, and later the Narnia films. And now with Backstage Pass only featuring the 2 visual effects stages, it wasn't long before it was permanently closed. But during special events, Stage 1 opened as a gift shop. Heck, even the Soundstage restaurant became a Bear in the Big Blue House show. However, the tram tour would continue to see updates over the years, such as new pre-shows and a partial vehicle from the now abandoned 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea attraction. The Boneyard would also see new additions time to time, but then came the beginning of the end for the tram tour. In 2003, a massive portion of the original Backlot was demolished to make way for Lights, Motors, Action. The end of the show's construction would leave only a fraction of the already drastically shortened original tram tour route, and would also see the permanent removal of Washington Square. And with the disaster that was Home on the Range, which pretty much served as a nail in the coffin for traditional hand-drawn animation, the same year also saw the closure of the animation department's tour, and the animation department as a whole. This would also spark a major conversation in Hollywood on the future of this once revolutionary form of entertainment. But tram tour aside, for years you could still find all kinds of traces of the former walking tour within Mickey Avenue, such as the original walkway to Stage 4, and when Soundstage 1 opened to the public, you could still see the original viewing windows. In 2008, after years of being unofficially known as simply Disney Studios, the park was given the new name of Hollywood Studios. No longer part of the tour, a portion of Mickey's Avenue would become Pixar Place, along with Soundstages 2 and 3 becoming Midway Mania, and with the horrific waiting times, Soundstage 1 eventually became a third track for the ride. As far as the tram tour, the last major change came in the form of the removal of live tram tour guides in favor of a pre-recorded spiel.
Oh, keep your cameras focused to the right. We're coming up on that perfect angle of the Eiffel Tower I told you about. It's a true masterpiece.
The tram tour held on for almost another 10 years, but in 2014, it was finally put out of its misery, and the last tour was held on September 27th that same year. And while the attraction had lasted just over 25 years, within 24 hours all traces of its existence were erased, at least from the outside. But the real question on everyone's mind was, what would replace it?
We're creating a jaw-dropping new world that represents our largest single-themed land expansion ever.
It wasn't long before what little remained of the original Backlot tour was completely demolished, including virtually all traces of what was now called Streets of America. And that November, the former magic of animation and studio tour became the Star Wars launch bay. A new land based on Toy Story was also announced alongside Star Wars, and with its construction, perhaps the very last visible trace of the walking tour was exposed and would become the new entrance into the land. The closure of the Great Movie Ride in 2017 in many ways symbolized the official end of the park's theme of the magic of movies. When you think about it, the 30th anniversary celebrating the park's history is a bit ironic, since the only original attraction left from its grand opening is the Indiana Jones stunt show. At the end of the day, I think it's safe to assume that the park's celebration of filmmaking and movie history is a thing of the past, and I won't even bother trying to comment on its future given how much is changing, so I'll just leave you with this. The very last remnant of New York Street, and one of the only traces of the original Backstage studio tour.